Last week, we covered how during a virtual talk at the Yale School of Medicine, Dr. Aruna Khilanani, who is a forensic psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, used language that some considered violent and hostile. Take a listen.
I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body, and wiping my bloody hands as I walked away relatively guiltless, with a bounce in my step, like I did the world a favor.
After the speech, the Yale School of Medicine released a statement that said, "We weighed our grave concern about the extreme hostility, imagery of violence, and profanity expressed by the speaker against our commitment to freedom of expression." And they decided to make the talk available only to people who attended it. Joining me now is forensic psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, Dr. Aruna Khilanani. Thank you so much for joining me on Black News tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Let's start with April 6th. You gave a virtual talk at Yale.
Yeah.
What was your intention? What was the premise of the talk for you?
So the intention is to actually talk about unconscious negative feelings, because if we're not actually aware of unconscious negative feelings, it's going to turn into a violent action. And people who are actually can access and tolerate negative feelings are mentally healthier. So of course I don't want to kill white people. That's completely ludicrous. But I think through my words, white people feel like they're actually getting murdered because my words are troubling. It's going to cause the death of their preferred self-image, their image that they've had through colonialism of being good, helping, and teaching. And as a psychoanalyst, I had a goal, which is to access unconscious feelings around race. So my work is actually about accessing unconscious negative feelings and ideas in the unconscious. So I was normalizing negative feelings, which is also what I do in my practice in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy.
So I'm going to read this again. You said, "I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body and wiping bloody hands as I walked away relatively guiltless with a bounce in my step, like I did the world an effing favor." That type of feeling, first of all, what creates that type of feeling in a person of color toward white people, and how common do you believe that feeling is?
So the feeling of frustration and rage is actually very common. I'm talking about it sort of metaphorically about how difficult it is to actually have an honest, direct conversation with somebody on race, because what you're coming up against is defenses. That's not happening. You're the problem. You're seeing things. And it's that level of frustration. So I'm talking metaphorically about the level of frustration, and I'm not speaking literally, but I am speaking about a feeling of futility about not being able to move further in a conversation. And I think that feeling is very common amongst people of color.
Have you ever expressed that fantasy before in an academic setting or any other formal professional setting?
No, but not around race, but I think around fantasies of killing are actually very common among psychoanalysts. It's like sort of the work that we do. And talking about that kind of stuff in forensic psychiatry is also very common. I think it got flagged because it's around race.
That was my next question. I mean, you're a trained expert. You're trained in psychoanalysis. And when we think about psychoanalysis, I mean, we enter all kinds of spaces around violence, around sex, what's in the mind is boundless, right? But something different happened here. Were you shocked that in a context where you're around peers, around other people who sort of know the various precincts of the mind that you can travel to, were you surprised that you got this kind of response?
Are you talking about the aftermath, or which part are you talking about right now? Just what happened over the past week?
Actually, that's a great point, right? So I guess the first question is, because most of us only got to hear it. We didn't get to see it because the audio was leaked. First of all, what was the response from the people in the room, and was that different than the response from people outside?
So from people in the room, it was all positive. It was something that I had never seen in a grand rounds before, which is all the people of color were speaking up and speaking up first. And something interesting also happened, which is a lot of the white people felt sort of emotionally safe enough to ask vulnerable questions, to put themselves out there, but it was an overwhelmingly positive response.
Wow. So the controversy comes afterward. And when we're going to take a short break, we're going to come back, and I want to talk about the controversy after and why you think that's happening. Everybody stay with me. We'll be back with more of an exclusive BNT interview right after this. Welcome back to Black News Tonight. I'm still here with Dr. Aruna Khilanani as we talk exclusively about her content of her virtual talk, The Psychopathic Problem of the White Mind. Before we talk about the kind of consequences there of your speech, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that you said in the speech that I thought were interesting and compelling. You said, this is the cost of talking to white people, the cost of your own life as they suck you dry. There are no good apples out there. White people make my blood boil. When you say there are no good apples out there, what kind of claim are you making?
I'm talking about people have this idea that racism is something that if you're consciously racist or if you're a Klan member, and I'm sort of making the claim that racism is something that is unconscious and it is actually in everyone, and everyone uses these words systemic. They're like, I know that racism is systemic, and yet individually when you call them out, they'll be like, well, it's not me, you can't say that. And so there's a disconnect between use of the word systemic and saying that racism is everywhere, but the moment you point it out individually, there's sort of people disown their own violence and racism.
Would it be fair to say, based on your expertise, that white people are psychopathic?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's many lies that, and didn't get to that part because what I've delivered was only part of a first series of talks. But the level of lying that white people do that has started since colonialism, we're just used to it. Such as every time that you steal a country, you loot, you say you've discovered something. I mean, this level of lie is actually part of history. We don't say that we killed all these people, we got rid of all the Native Americans. We say we discovered America. You don't talk about the level of death. You don't talk about the level of what actually occurred. You wipe the slate clean, you sanitize the violence, and you actually got lost along the way. You're trying to go to India, and then you say you discovered something. And this level of discovery is everywhere. You've discovered vegetarianism. You've discovered yoga. You've discovered everything is a discovery, and it's all actually stolen.
So what you're talking about at this point is a kind of macro level, systemic, structural kind of thing. But you're also trained to think about the psyche, which is about the individual at a certain level.
Absolutely.
To what extent can we say that individual white people are psychopathic or unhealthy or out of their minds? I'm using this language for those who are watching. I'm using this language based on what was in the speech and based on other work that's been published. This isn't necessarily my personal opinion. It's the analysis here. Do you think, to what extent can we say that individual white people are this thing versus saying that there's a culture of theft, a culture of colonialism? And is there a useful distinction to be made between the two?
I think people, there is a useful distinction to be made. And on one level, yes, that's absolutely true. And it's different than actual individual psychopathy, the way that people conceive of it. On another level, when we are thinking about individual responsibility and how it is that people change, I think that using the words systemic and there's a culture operate defensively to not actually let yourself go into your own unconscious and go into those dark places of what you're actually doing. So I'm actually talking about it sort of as a defensive structure, like not acknowledging that on an individual level, I think can operate as a defense.
You say that we need to remember that directly talking to white people is a waste of time. It's useless, you say, because they are at the wrong level of conversation. Addressing racism assumes that white people can see and process what we're talking about. If white people are incapable of being engaged on race, and there's a structural dynamic that makes it somewhat impossible, or at least makes racism intractable, then are we in a place of hopelessness around racism? What are we to do?
No, I was talking about a feeling of futility, right? So I'm talking metaphorically about a feeling of futility, and the disconnect that I'm talking about is that white people actually they have a different conscious experience of themselves rather than what they're actually doing. So my entire first series is what is the disconnect between their identity, how they see themselves, and what they're actually doing? What is the disconnect between their actions and how they view themselves? So I'm saying the reason they can't get it at this moment in time, and what the first series is what is white identity? How do they view themselves that is actually very different from their actions? So sort of naming that problem first so that we can actually move forward and talk about race.
Sometimes we say things and we do harm with our words, we upset people, and we regret it. And then there are times where we have to say, at least I believe, that just because white people are mad doesn't mean we did anything wrong, right? Right. That we shouldn't infantilize white people, we shouldn't center white people all the time. Which one of these are we dealing with in the case of your lecture at Yale? Is this a situation where you feel like you did some things that you could do differently, or that you did harm that was unintended? Or is this a case where white people are upset because they're being named and outed and subjected to scrutiny?
So I think the way that I framed the lecture was I sort of said that what is happening in this space is I'm giving you, since conversation around race is always hard, I'm inviting you into a room where we talk about you. And this is sort of a special invitation to first see how we view you, because that might be very different than your conscious experience of yourself. So it's sort of an invitation into sort of a sacred space to see how it is that white people are actually viewed.
So if you were able to give this speech, or if you give the speech again, would you use the same example? Would you appeal to the same fantasy metaphor, or would you do something different?
Well, you have to keep in mind the audience, right? So the audience that I spoke to are psychiatrists and mental health workers, and I'm talking about psychoanalytic stuff. And if they can't go there into those dark places, then I'm not sure like how we're going to be able to move forward. I do think that if it's a different audience, I probably wouldn't have used those metaphors. And I would cater it to who the audience is and what I feel like they're able to tolerate. But people in our profession are actually used to sitting with very dark feelings. It's our job to metabolize negative feelings. It's our job to make connections between the conscious and the unconscious. That is what we do. In our practices, we teach people how to tolerate those very dark places in their life that they normally can't actually go. And that's actually where we need to go in order to move forward on race. So I'm speaking to a group of highly trained individuals, medical professionals that are trained in doing this kind of thing and understand the importance of going into negative feelings, because if you can't actually tolerate your negative feelings, they're going to come out in actions, and they'll actually harm yourself and you'll harm someone else as well. So for that audience, I wouldn't change it.
Leaked. Since this audio was leaked, you've been a target of the right. You've been on every conservative dartboard.
Yep.
What's life been like for you?
It wasn't fun. Definitely wasn't fun. It's been really hard because, like I said, that this talk was for a certain group of people. And imagine that the group of people, like I said, this talk was for people who want to understand and are ready to hear about their own violence. That is how I framed it. Now, and I think of it in the sort of like the same way I think about psychotherapy. People come into psychotherapy and they come into psychoanalysis who are ready. They're ready to actually reflect. They don't want to keep saying the problem is outside of me. It's the world. It's my boyfriend. It's my child. It's this. They know that they need to do the inner work. Now imagine that the talk suddenly got leaked to the very same population of people that aren't ready to do the work and actually don't think that there's a problem. So if you aren't ready to do the work and you don't think there's a problem, what's going to happen? You're the problem. It would be like me going around the world would be like, you need to do a psychoanalysis.
That's what I say, you become the problem. I mean, that's exactly the point, right? Is that they have decided that there is a problem, but it's you, because any type of race talk is the problem. And so anyone who mentions race or names race becomes the problem. And there's a way that your speech gave them a very convenient